Welcome to NIL4U. I'm Rob Finkelstein, founder and CEO of Alumni Direct, where we've created a platform for athletes and other alumni to network and connect in their centralized communities. Always excited to do this show. We cover various headlines in NIL. We try to make it a lot about education. And education is what my co-host Trent Clark is all about. Love doing my shows with Trent. Trent, how you doing today?
Man, I am awesome, Rob. Another great NIL4U educational episode. And of course, we got All-Star with us, Thomas Koch. I'm super excited. Thomas, I got a chance to spend a little time together last week out at a small university in Michigan, talking NIL. And I tell you, Thomas, I think you'll second this. How about the passion of these young athletes that are just trying to figure this thing out?
It's great to see. I mean, honestly, they inspire me, and that's why this exists, right? Is that those students that have that opportunity, and for those of us that were former small college athletes, knowing what they face, it's great to see how much they put into this and how many questions they ask and how hopefully they can get more out of it than they are right now.
For sure. Thomas Koch. Now, as all of you know, my background, I am the CEO of Aim for NIL, an online education for NIL, and love to see you there. We'll throw up a little codes on the way as we go. But for Thomas, small college football player, now attorney, graduated from Michigan State Law School. You've been an entrepreneur. Now you're an entrepreneur in residence out at Grand Valley State University, helping all these young kids be entrepreneurs, which, man, you're speaking my language, man. As an entrepreneur organization member, like, I get all fired up because these kids, this is the big opportunity for me, like Entrepreneur 404. And because this is not 100 level anymore. And here's the other thing, because you are the CEO of Varsity Gems, which has NFT trading cards for athletes, a place to make NIL money. And so that's super exciting. We want to hear more about that. I'd like to start with the fact that, man, I have been frustrated with the media forever and kids that said, hey, start a website. You're going to be an entrepreneur and you're going to make millions. You know, like, okay, it's easy, right? And so now this is pretty awesome because the rubber's hit the road, right? Now it's like, hey, you can be an entrepreneur. Start your NIL LLC, get yourself going and start doing some deals. And like, people find out how hard that is, right? Like, it is not easy to be a business owner. What's your thing that you've seen from all? I mean, and you're in the heart and thick of these college, not only athletes being entrepreneurs, but all sorts of entrepreneurs out at Grand Valley State.
Yeah, I think, I treat an athlete as no different than any other student, with the one key difference being that they have more of their time taken up by being a student athlete. So They can't come into the entrepreneurship center on campus for 20 hours a week like some students can. But to your point, it's entrepreneurship at its core. It's, I used to have a CEO that I worked for who said that entrepreneurship is apple pie and motherhood here in America. And to some extent, that's true. This is built into our fabric as a country. And students come to school to learn skills, whether they wind up starting their own business or not, learning how to market yourself, learning how to deal with finance and tax and accounting and some basic legal things. So a student athlete is uniquely positioned right now to build a portfolio that when they graduate, they're not only entrepreneurial and potentially can start their own business, but they can be awesome for whoever hires them after school. And I think that's the big thing when I mix NIL with what I do as an entrepreneur in residence, is thinking about how do we make these students employable for the huge percentage that they're going to be in the business world as opposed to the sports world after they graduate, and doing something that's completely different than playing basketball or baseball or whatever sport they play.
Yeah, and I also think the power in that, like, hey, listen, even the best entrepreneurs in the world, I know everyone loves to read about the 19-year-olds who quit college and started his own thing. And hey, God bless them, man. That's awesome. But most of us, we went and worked for somebody. We got a job and we had to figure out how to be employable, right? And fortunately, I failed for it. So, I had to go start my own thing because it was decided you don't make that good of an employee, Trent. And so, then you're on your own, right? And so, I think as we get down to this, the skill set that the kids are getting is just remarkable. And man, I don't think you could reproduce this. And I think this is the big advantages that colleges can really sell into the value of NIL right now. And I think they're missing it.
Yeah, I mean, overall, I've talked to a lot of school administrators and coaches and so forth. I think for the most part, schools do a great job. It's just they're resource constrained, right? So
Yeah.
a lot of times, you talked about the frustration with the news media. One thing that does frustrate me here is not understanding the role of an athletic director or a compliance director at a Division III or Division II school is not solely around NIL. It's one component. They were already probably working a 60-hour week, if not 90-hour week. Now they're working a 100-hour week. And so it's added a dynamic to athletic departments, but it is a unique opportunity. It's also a time where I was just having this discussion about Ivy League athletics. If you're an athlete who's got the academic wherewithal to go to an Ivy League school, you can use NIL as a way to pay for school and afford that in a different way than you ever could before. So it could change the dynamic. It probably won't in the big ticket sports like football and basketball, but you've seen already programs like Yale lacrosse can certainly be successful, Yale hockey, and other programs like that. So it's given students power because now they can afford to go to school and the college sports dream isn't out of reach. That's one of the things that for me, we talked about a lot as NIL was coming up. What about the student athletes we knew who at 18 or 19 couldn't make that college jump because their opportunities were non-scholarship or low scholarship opportunities, and the gap between that and being able to afford school didn't exist. Now NIL can be an opportunity, and especially if they can be entrepreneurial and connect with their alumni and their fans who are going to help them after they're done playing their sport. That is the liquid gold, right? That makes this into a great ecosystem, especially for alumni who want to connect with younger people and go to games wishing they could high five the kid. So it's a lot of fun to see those kind of connections happen.
Yeah, Rob, speak to that. I mean, alumni direct. You've talked about the power of network, and I'm guilty of this, by the way, as a former college athlete. Thomas, I don't know how well you've done tapping into an elite and exclusive alumni of K College. No, most people don't know Kalamazoo College is a really big deal in the state of Michigan. It is a small university that has pumped out some major players in our society with massive impact. I watched the tennis program for years very closely, still host the national championships for the 18-16U boys, which are direct, like first round choices, like right into the US Open, direct feed. Right. It is a really big deal, and they have dominated that environment in tennis for, I want to say, like 30, 40 years, and it's unbelievable, some of the athletics. Let's talk, Rob. Let's jump on this alumni part from the man of Alumni Direct.
Thanks, Trent. Yeah, so it's alumni engagement is so critical, and it's really interesting. I have another podcast. I was talking to an athlete this morning about it, and I think a lot of athletes, they could be non-athletes, who miss that boat and understanding of how powerful it is to tap into alumni. And so, I talked to this guy. He actually went to Michigan, and it seems like they're doing some pretty good things. But I said, how much is their engagement of athletes coming back as alumni? And I think what I've found is that a lot of times with the schools, there's changeovers in the athletic department, there's changeovers in coaches. So because of that, they might not necessarily be reaching out as much and tapping into the alumni athletes. But Trent, you heard this on a previous conversation. I was on a call with I went to University of Delaware, and I was on with one of I was an athlete there. I ran cross country and track, but we had one of our Hall of Fame football players was on with me. And we were talking to their athletic department, and they said their biggest, they're struggling with mentors. And this guy's like, listen, I'm a Hall of Fame player, played 10 years in the NFL, tap into me. And I think, I guess it goes both ways. I mean, the schools, I think, need to do it. And you mentioned it briefly, Thomas. I don't know what kind of, because you're in that system, like, is there education for the athletic departments? And are they kind of tapping into have a better understanding for NIL or for, like what we're just talking about, alumni engagement?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the alumni engagement piece is the next frontier. It's more and more being discussed. Some schools have stronger alumni networks than others. And, I think Trent brought up some of the unique dynamics of a school like Kalamazoo, where we're a top-ranked elite liberal arts school. And so we're a small community to begin with. And those that played sports is then an even smaller subset within that. Only school in the country where our tennis stadium is bigger than our football stadium, which is fantastic. And just so you said 30 to 40 years. We actually had a streak at one time of like 78 straight years as conference champions. Unfortunately, we were on probation. So one year, the conference didn't award the championship because we were the best team. And the other school said, yeah, whoever wins still lost to K. But I think, as far as the front end, educating athletes, most of the schools have done a pretty good job. They're getting the education themselves. I've talked to a number of athletic director groups. Generally, I do this pro bono because I work at a university, and I enjoy helping athletic directors and compliance folks and coaches know this. So a lot of them bring in someone like me, or they do pay people to come in and educate the administrators and the student athletes. The other thing is a lot of them are partnering with your open doorses and influencers and those types of programs. SportsE is another one that comes up where they're educating how this should all work within their athletic department. But it's tough because I always pick on my son. He was a track and field athlete at Oakland University, and he was great. He had open doors training, and I think he and his roommates put it on a laptop while they were playing Call of Duty, and it was on in the background so they could get credit for watching it, but they didn't actually pay attention. So it really depends on the student athletes too. Some student athletes, this is just white noise. And you have to bear in mind, there are athletic departments where there's a lot going on. If you're a championship athletic department where NIL is just a small piece of what they're doing, and I think the fascinating thing is alumni have been coming out of the woodwork more. And like you said, with that Hall of Fame player from Delaware saying, hey, I'd love to mentor. I'd love to do this. And every year at Kalamazoo, I get invited into what's called the Hornet Hive, where you apply, you say who you are, and sometimes you're paired as a mentor, sometimes you're not. But it's, even at a small school, it's a couple of emails. It's run by an assistant coach, John Krajasic, and, John reaches out. So it's a lot of fun. I think a lot of schools do that kind of stuff and keep the alumni involved, but also fans who are wanting to meet these players and have those relationships. It's great. So I think that's the next component. And I've been talking to a number of athletic directors, mostly at the D2 level, who have said, how do we better engage with alumni? What are the tools that we can do to do that, especially when a program's not well established? We have a lot of luxury. I work at Grand Valley, and we have a luxury of having a big football stadium where people show up for games, people tailgate, people do all that stuff. Our basketball games are pretty well attended for D2. We have a great athletic department, men's and women's. So we're more established than some of the other programs, the younger schools and schools that just don't have the success yet. So school pride really matters. And that's something that the other schools are trying to figure out. The better we are, the more school pride we can build. And that can mean enrollment goes up. That can mean better engagement for the students and student athletes and so forth.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too regarding that, I also talk about there's a lot of even helping alumni athletes out themselves. I mean, so whether they getting help from other alumni athletes. So we've talked to different I've talked to a couple athletic departments about that. Is like how do you engage your alumni not only to help your current students but helping out your alumni athletes as well, because a lot of them need help. I mean, they've transitioned out of sport, they've had a rough time, so that's kind of critical as well.
Yeah, I tell you, it's something that, coming back to it, message of the day, certainly a lesson is like, hey, this is something that you've done a really good job, Thomas, of staying involved in your former university. Rob, I take it that was Rich Gannon. Is that our Delaware alum? Or is that somebody different?
Somebody different.
You've got all sorts of quarterbacks out of Delaware.
Well, no, actually, surprising. This guy's name is Ivory Sully, great guy. So props out to Ivory. Ivory was a defensive player for Delaware. He walked on. He was on the Rams Super Bowl team back in 1980 or 79, one of those years.
Yep.
Okay, nice. Well,
their famous football alum was a walk-on named Joe Biden, right?
Yeah. Well, if you ask Joe, I think that's actually he might remember it that way. Actually,
but there was another Joe Flacco.
Yeah, Joe Flacco.
We talk about him.
Is he also a Delaware guy?
He's a Delaware guy too. Yeah.
Jeez, he's like quarterback you. There you go. All right, so let's jump into a friend of yours and mine, Thomas, Jessica Visser over at Varnum Law. Amazingly, Thomas, I mean, it's interesting because you and I sit in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and it's like a hotbed of NIL activity, man. I mean, there's just a bunch of companies here involved with Base Path and all sorts of different groups, right? And so it's fun to kind of be in the heart of it. And, we're seeing this now, like, hey, man, they want to start having some level 2 sanctions on these issues with NIL and imposing some issues, right? 2 years of probation, that's no joke. And obviously, Florida State, has made big headlines because there's so much going on. They've got the NIL violations, very serious. They've got, obviously a media basic blitz about how they were slighted out of the Final Four in the college football championship. And now, they're getting them on breach of contract because they're going to change conferences, right? I mean, it's a hotbed of legal mess. Florida State's going to end up hiring 17 Thomas Cokes because they're going to need a bunch of defense out there. Like, I don't know what's going on, but the Seminoles are under fire down there.
Yeah, I look at this and I say, I'm kind of sad that it's actually happening to Florida State because it takes away the old Jerry Tarkanian quote, which is that, Duke did something really bad, so we're going to have to really go after Cleveland State hard. And usually they're picking on some little school and making an example out of them, so the bigger schools come in line. I think what I would say is Florida State is not unique in what they're doing. Whenever you look at one of these scandals, it's probably not unique. It's probably happening in other schools as well. And I don't even want to call it a scandal yet. The reality is these collectives were operating without a lot of oversight. And there were multiple collectives at some of these schools. Some were, you brought up BasePath, a company that manages collectives, 1450 Partners, who Jessica also knows, who manages some collectives. There's a bunch of companies that do these collectives. Some of them do a great job. Here's what's legal. Here's what's not legal. Let's educate the players. Let's educate those involved. Some don't. And when you have an unregulated environment like that, it's always a bit of a struggle to rein things in, especially at places where alumni want to compete now and win now because it's a big deal to them. It means a lot to them. And I think schools in Florida are always going to be on the cutting edge of violations because historically Miami was like every other probation announcement was Miami in the old days.
Yeah.
I think the reality is the NCAA, with some of the new rules that are being proposed and some of the ideas that are out there, and the new president, Charlie Baker, who's really a politician at heart. And so he's thinking very differently than the previous administrators. I think you're going to see some overall sea changes with how the NCAA operates and how these schools participate in the NCAA, especially when it comes to sports like football and basketball. I think the NCAA is the big person who gets egg on their face. They're the one who gets knocked the most in all of this. And I think they forget, Rob knows this a lot. My son was a high jumper. He was great, but without the NCAA, he doesn't exist, right? The school wouldn't be having high jump without the NCAA. So while everyone's criticizing the NCAA and the flawed system that they've put together, we also have to bear in mind the opportunities that they've created for student athletes, while still being very willing to say, here are the criticisms we have of that, and here's what's going on. This will be one of many stories. Last summer, I think it was Miami, where, the booster had been doing some illegal things with the Cavender twins. So every year...
Met him early, I think. I think what he did is he met him while they were still in the portal, which obviously is a direct no-no. Right.
And look, the notion, we're not naive. We're adults in the situation. The notion that boosters aren't reaching out to kids and doing certain things, it's crazy, but what can you prove and what can actually be measured? And also, who turned you in? Is there somebody out there looking to turn a school in and make a big deal out of a situation? I'm not saying that a certain blue and gold school in Michigan got in trouble for something this year that every other school does, but somebody turned them in. That may or may not have happened. We'll find out when they're
may or may not. I think that blue and gold school hoisted the national championship, but I'm not sure.
Right.
So, okay, so let's get this next one, Rob. Take us through this.
Yeah, so Campus Inc. has an NIL store, and they have surpassed $1 million from paid all the different things, the apparel and things they have in there, which is crazy. I mean, so it's I guess it's almost like kind of like a Fanatics, but it's specifically geared towards NIL.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the big names they're leading with, right? Paige Buchers of UConn, an athlete making over a few $100,000. I recall her, in a direct kind of, or maybe an indirect comment was, why would she leave college when she makes more in NIL than she could make in the WNBA? Because she's a really good player, right? And so Zach Edey and Angel Reese were 1 and 2 last year, coming out of March Madness as the 2 NIL All-Stars in engagement and social of all the college basketball. So did really well there. Caleb Love, obviously, another famous last name, which is always good. And then, do you have is Varsity Gems? Are you guys in a store? Are you guys doing anything direct with that, or is everything direct through you guys?
Well, I do want to say a couple of things. One, I know the guys at Campus Inc., Steven and Eric and those guys, phenomenal, and I'm really glad to see their success. I think, this article illustrates they started out in Illinois and working with like Illinois and Purdue. They've been backed by
Mark Cuban, right? Yeah.
So, they're doing a phenomenal job. Something like 40 schools that have their own stores and 100 total schools where they have licenses, and that number is growing. And if you talk to their development team, they're having a lot of good conversations, and they're very supportive of both the athletes and the institution and what they're doing. So I think they're an example of someone who's got the right model. Varsity Gems, so we're a little bit dormant right now because we're kind of retooling what we were doing, but we were our own marketplace when we got started. We were going out recruiting all the athletes on our own, and still do that because we want to have the one-to-one relationship. And what we found very quickly is there were athletes that wanted nothing to do with NIL. There just were, and there were athletes that wanted to do a lot with it. There were some athletes that said, do all the work for me and I'll participate, or I'm going to take this off your plate completely because I've got an agent and I've got a guy and I've got a marketing team behind me. So what you have to be aware of if you're a service provider in this industry is knowing the student athletes and meeting them at their table. Then the second thing is, making sure you have a good relationship with the athletic department and that you're doing the right thing, giving the student the letter they need to give to the institution so they can report back, making sure that everything is in place so they can do the proper reporting and talk with their athletic directors. And one of my favorite things to do is get on the phone. I work a lot with basketball players. I love it when they've got a coach or an athletic director or somebody else on the call so we can answer questions and they can ask us questions. And I think that's one of the things with all of these service providers that you're going to see. The ones that are honest, upfront, transparent are going to last a lot longer than the ones that kind of hide the ball or take a different tack to it.
Love it. How about this one, Rob?
Yeah, last one here. We always talk about NIL for good, and Thomas, this is big for us. I mean, it's you always hear the stories of these people making all this money and all that, but it's great when we see give back. So here, the UConn women's basketball team created these NIL jerseys, and they used that to give to out to cancer, which is just another great instance of seeing these athletes that care. Not that athletes don't care, but it's nice to see the NIL money going to some of these different organizations.
Yeah, and I honestly, Trent, last week we met at Cornerstone University, which is at its core, it's a Christian school, right? And there are a lot of Christian institutions that are NIIA or NCAA programs, and Catholic institutions, and even outside of religious institutions where they've got a good community focus. And a lot of the student athletes want to use their NIL to give back, certainly make a little bit on it, but they want to use their clout and who they are to give back and do things like this. And, a lot of them have been touched by things like cancer. So it's really important that they have that opportunity to do this. And it's really cool when you can put something to, in action like this. It kind of reminds me of here locally, we have the Pink Arrow game at Lowell, which has raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for breast cancer. And, now you can do that thing at the collegiate level and have some more opportunities for the student athletes to give back in a great way that maybe because of their time constraints, they can't.
Yeah, it's and we talk about this. I think, like you said, it's a real opportunity, and that's part of the learning and feeling good about what I'm doing, and that can be from anything for people out there. That could be giving to your church, that could be giving to an association, giving to the Humane Society. There's wherever your passions lie. I think people want to come alongside and be a part of it. And the really cool thing now, Thomas, is that, man, what's off limits on marketing? Anything's go on social. You get creative, and it really gets fun. One of the headlines I saw there as we were kind of flipping through is Blake Corum, man. What a guy who's both done a ton for good, but man, he's really just he's really taken advantage of the NIL, been right there for it, really got some nice opportunities. Now you see a guy, as you've seen, and my business associate and partner, David Gregory, who's a sports agent. These people are now heading out of NIL work to professional endorsements now. And man, this guy's already got 12 to 20 companies that he's already worked with, which is fabulous. Got a resume for endorsements. Mm-hmm. And how does this transition now? Because he talks about what a better way to start his career, not being tied to, man, if I don't get a bonus and get drafted high enough, I can't pay off my student loans, or I can't get this, or I can't get that, or I won't find my way here, or it's going to be harder. And it might give a kid more leeway, for more runway for walk on, more like we've talked about European pro players, and it gives you some more runway to find a place in the professional game that may be not at the highest level in the U.S. market. Is that fair?
Yeah, and I think honestly, at the end of the day, not every athlete is meant to be a professional athlete. It's very difficult to become a professional athlete, very difficult to maintain that career, and not everybody might want to be a professional athlete. Believe it or not, there are guys who say, man, football took a toll on my body and I'm done. I don't want to go in the NFL and get in 50 car crashes a week every Sunday plus practice.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of impetus for these student athletes to be able to build upon what they've done in college. And, we've seen success like that, but how many great college basketball players didn't translate into the NBA? And they're still fan favorites. They're still, people that deserve and people want to support them, and they can do great things. And I think NIL allows that vehicle. The second thing is, I think it keeps a lot of students having more options. So how my career ends now can look a lot different, and I may stay at certain schools or pick certain schools based on different levels of opportunity. In other words, I don't have to go to the school that produces the most NFL players. I can go to the school that's the best educational fit for me and hope if I still get that crack at the NFL. But if not, I've got a career path here, and I've already got some underpinnings, maybe some money in the bank to help me go and live my dreams in other ways. So I think that's really important to note, because as much as we love college sports, and a lot of people will say, oh, they're nothing more than minor leagues for the big time sports, they're not. Most at Michigan State, a fraction of the students are athletes. At smaller schools, it's a bigger percentage, but at the smaller schools, none of them are going pro, right? So you're there to get an education, to make long-lasting relationships with your fellow students and your alumni. So we need to go back to what the real purpose of this is, and treat it as that, while also not losing sight of the fact that it is a business opportunity. And college sports, love it or hate it, has become big business. It just has. It has been for a long time. And now we don't have to be tongue in cheek about it anymore. We can come out and say it and not pretend like kids are these pure amateurs that, go into the smoking room of their fraternity at night and that's it. We know that there are supporters and people out there who want them to be able to make money and live a comfortable lifestyle and be able to support themselves, and in some cases their families. I've helped a kid buy a hotel room for his mom who needed a job and needed a place to change. She was homeless, for a job interview, using his NIL funds. I've seen student athletes use it to buy their plane tickets back and forth because they go to school. And not every student athlete, I actually, one of the things that frustrated me a lot when I have these conversations is people say, oh, student athletes really don't need any money. And I'm like, man, you've never been an athlete. You don't get it. Like, I played with kids from the inner city that didn't have anything, right? And, the team issued clothes became their clothes. There are a lot of kids that are struggling, not just in athletics, across the board. But if you're a great mathematician, you can go work for a company using your math skill, and they can pay you straight up and down every day, and your tuition can be covered. An athlete couldn't do that in the past. Now they can. So let's call it what it is and give these kids that opportunity to benefit from their skill set. So yeah, I can talk forever about this topic.
Yeah, it's exciting. I mean, it's exciting because there's opportunities. And I still love the old NCAA ads that say, hey, most kids are going pro in something else, right?
Right.
And I love that. Like, I think, and it still stands. I mean, there's 570,000 college athletes. Like, hey, listen, if 10 or 12,000 are going to end up in a pro game, that's a great number of kids that are just going to do something else, right?
Right.
And so I think this learning is so valuable. And I think that creative way now of how people are using their NIL, and I think you used a great example, like supplement your tuition. Ivy League kids don't get athletic scholarship, right? I mean, they're going to go and play in a Division I program, and then their hockey programs are incredible, by the way. And so you've got certain sports that they actually dominate there. They have a high level of requirement academically, much more than most, and then not a low cost. So, as you get this opportunity, grants, I mean, people work really hard to get there for them. But man, what a great marriage of getting to know your alumni direct, get involved there and get to know your alumni, and then marry that with some NIL, because you've got entrepreneurial people and boosters who want to help these kids. And man, I think there can be win-win-wins here all around if we can just get it done right.
Yeah. I do want to say one thing, the Ivy Leagues, while they don't give athletic scholarships, there was a great article about the positioning of the Ivies in the era of NIL. And I've talked to a number of Ivy schools about collectives, a lot of them in the hockey space. And Varsity Gems was started at Dartmouth College through a study that we did with Dartmouth College. And I work at Cornell. That's my full-time job. So to me, Ivy League athletics, very similar to elite academic schools at the D3 level, most students are there on some kind of, they're not getting athletic aid, but they're getting financial aid in other ways. So for instance, the last number I saw, Princeton, was $68,000 a year, and about $58,000 of that was covered by some kind of aid for the typical student. What's unique about Ivy League athletics is, first of all, the student athlete, once they graduate, they're no longer eligible in the Ivy Leagues. So you play 4 years at Princeton, and you still have a year of eligibility. You cannot use it at Princeton. There's no such thing as a grad student athlete in the Ivy Leagues. So you can go and transfer to a different school and you get a scholarship and play. So we have seen athletes that have established themselves as a great player at one of these schools. The second thing is the coaches have the ability through their admissions policies. They still have to be really high achieving students. I'm not saying they're reducing their admissions policies, but they can nod to certain guys and say, let's make sure we get that guy in. We get so many kids in a year to play football or these other things. So it's creating opportunities for students. And it's always a shame when students shy away from those kind of programs or D3 programs that are elite programs or FCS programs that are elite, like the Patriot League, because they see the cost and they don't actually have the conversation. So one of the things I think NIL has done is it's also brought in student athletes. Go talk to your financial aid office as you're being recruited and ask them if they can do better. Ask them what more they can do for you and see what they can really put together. Too often when I talk to students, general population students, they've never had a conversation with financial aid. And I'm always amazed by that. I'm like, how do you know what was available for you if you never asked or went into it or looked into the situation? Because the travesty when I was coaching AAU basketball was when a kid would take a scholarship to a school he didn't want to go to that was not suited to him just because it was a scholarship and therefore affordable. And I want to make air quotes really loud, but it wasn't really affordable, right? It's not setting him up for the future he wants to achieve. And he could have gone to a school that didn't give scholarships that was a better academic fit, better social fit, better community fit for him, but didn't ask the questions about financial aid and how much would this cost and what does that actually look like. And my two roommates were from the inner city. They weren't kids that were from upper middle class backgrounds. I was the rich kid on the team who came, like my parents could stroke a check for all 4 years tuition day one if they wanted to. So I was unique. That was not most of the kids at Kalamazoo or most of the student athletes.
No, I think you brought up great. We talked a little bit about this last week at Cornerstone University. Is that you're seeing these? Hey, can I get a 7th year of eligibility? They got the COVID year, they got a red shirt, and it's like, man, this is and in hockey, hockey you play juniors till you're 20. So you could potentially have a 27-year-old on campus, like it's like, hey man, I'm gonna make some NIL money but I think there is some business structure that, hey, if you're gonna work your NIL and redshirt, you could have a 5-year business in this and actually position yourself very well to start your career after education, including most schools which will allow for get a secondary degree or a grad program.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Rob?
Yeah, I'm with you on this. It's
I do want to stress, I think to me, I still go back to what is college really all about and the notion of scholar athletes. One thing that does bother me about the NIL conversation is that people have a little bit lost sight of that scholar athlete. And just to be clear, I don't think it's the athletes that have lost that sight. And I don't think it's the administrators and coaches that are involved. I think many of them still feel that way. But I think there are a lot of people outside. The other big frustration I have with NIL, and we're starting to already see companies go away that just didn't make it, they got started and couldn't get enough customers or whatever. A lot of people that were out to run this as a business for themselves and create the next hot NIL startup aren't going to make it. And that it's created this industry that has created all these people in it that are experts. And I would never, if anyone said, Tom, you're an NIL expert, I would say, I am not an NIL expert. I am as stupid about this issue as just about anybody else. I've just talked to a lot of people and asked them how they feel. And I think a lot of times we lose sight of remembering who this is really about, which is the student athletes and what's best for them. And that's why I always go back to the ADs, the administrators, the coaches, the people that have devoted their lives to working with student athletes. These are not a D2 women's soccer coach is not a millionaire. She's not making a ton of money. He or she is not making a ton of money. They're there because they love the game and they love helping kids, right? And so I also want to, maintain that this is very much in support of the scholar athlete modality and creating these Renaissance people. I used to say Renaissance man, but we'll say Renaissance humans at all levels of college play and giving them opportunities to express who they are if they so choose. And also saying, if you don't want to do this and you just want to be an athlete and go to school, I talked to a bunch of students for Michigan Tech. They're like, dude, I'm an engineering student. I don't care about NIL. I'm going to play football. I'm going to graduate from Michigan Tech. I'm probably going to go get a master's degree. That's it. I don't need NIL money, but thanks for calling me. Good for them. Let them continue to do that.
And one other quick, I do have one quick question. Sorry, Trent. You were talking about just other ways of getting money in the financial aid and stuff like that. So I remember, just brought back memories of when I went to school, and I went to a liberal arts school my first year, Albright College, and we got grants to run. So is that kind of what you were touching on, where there's different opportunities like that, if not NIL?
Yeah, most schools will have academic aid and other financial aid that's available to students, and it's changed, but you want to minimize any student loan impact you're going to have just any student athlete, any student, not just student athletes, any student at a school. But the reality is there are opportunities that most students leave on the table. And, we still have a situation where only like a quarter to a third of the population goes to school. So a lot of these kids' parents didn't go to school and didn't go through that financial aid discussion. They're filling out a FAFSA form for the first time. They're doing all this stuff for the very first time. And they think the school offered me this, that's the end all be all. I can't ask that person. Well, the financial aid people are there to talk to, and go talk to them and figure out what they can do for you and if there's better deals. And I think especially at smaller schools, they really want students to come in. They want a variety of students, and they don't want just rich kids coming to play sports. And also the more, whether it's through aid or a kid paying a check, these sports, we use the term revenue and non-revenue sports, and no D3 program is probably making money on their football program if you look at what they spend. But a football program brings 100 kids to school, to campus, some of whom are going to be paying full freight. And so the sports landscape is actually really beneficial for colleges on a number of levels. And so that's why it's important that these scholar athletes exist. It's a great opportunity for them. And the schools, for a long time at the top end, probably it was a little bit exploitative. At D3, it really wasn't. The student athlete really had a lot of power in that dynamic, or at least felt like they could have some say in it. Like, I remember people call me say, oh, you played football in college. I didn't. I was on the team for one season, then a couple of weeks. I never played. I got into one game. But it was cool because Coach Rogers, who I had, he just retired as a high school coach here in West Michigan. If I had a lab or something I had to go to, Coach Rogers wasn't telling me to go to practice instead of my lab. Sorry, but this is D3. I'm going to the lab because there's a lot bigger chance I'm going to be some kind of weird scientist than I am going to be a D tackle in the pro level, because I'm 5'9" and 240. There's a reason why I'm not a D tackle at Michigan State. So I think we have to remind ourselves of why these students are doing this and what opportunities are available to them and who holds the cards in these situations.
Well, I think that's a bad rap that's going across because of media, right? The media, and we pull up the headlines, right? The media is all about Nebraska, Florida State, Alabama, Duke. I mean, it's just the big brands. I mean, obviously headlines sell. I get it. But the indication is that NIL is about 7,000 kids of the 570. And that's just not true. And there's nothing probably sexy about a kid over at Grand Valley State who has, 4 deals between $250 and $500 a month. And makes between $1,000 and $2,000 a month as a full-time athlete. But hey, man, that's $12,000 to $24,000 a year. Like there's no part-time job you're getting as a college athlete for 3 months in summer that's going to get you that money. So getting engaged and getting involved, there may be nothing sexy about it, but you're going to walk away with a nice little down payment on a house. Some money in your pocket.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So let's end here real quick with an education. From your standpoint, on the NIL, and let's kind of focus in on the small college. You obviously know it intimately as a player yourself there, as your son going to a relatively small D1 school, and you're tied to a Division II school with all the entrepreneur work and a very good athletic program, by the way. But what's probably your educational tip for not only the kids but the parents out there who are, man, I mean, they feel like they're playing from way far behind, right, on this thing. And if you don't own a company and you're not an entrepreneur, you're probably even further behind on this thing to like, hey, how does my kid make money? I don't get it. So what would you say would be kind of a jumping off foundational point for you?
First thing I always tell people is when you're talking to a school and you have questions about NIL, ask the question to their administrators and the people in the room. They're the first line of person to get to know. And generally they know what they're talking about. From my personal experience, I think most of them know what they're talking about. Some wish they had better resources than others. The second thing is, and it's a follow-up to that, is ask questions. Any deal you're going to do, ask every question you need to. If you are unsure about something, ask them. And that transparency has to be there. And that's the number one thing I see when I hear bad stories is somebody didn't ask the question they should have and got themselves in trouble. At the end of the day, that is the best way to protect yourself. And don't be afraid if you're a young person to have a representative, whether that's your parents, whether it's your Uncle Buck down the road, whoever it is. I don't care. When a student athlete says, is it all right if so-and-so sits in with me? Yes. Get them on the phone. Let them ask me questions. 9 times out of 10, the parent has more questions than the kid because the parents are the ones that most need to know this. The last piece I would say for parents is there is a danger zone right now in NIL. Your kids are not a meal ticket. Okay. So make sure that that whatever you're promoting and doing is something they want to do. Don't burn your kid out. Sports is supposed to be fun. Competition is supposed to be fun. And the one thing that I think we've lost as sports has become more and more of a business. Last week we saw the former general manager of the Bulls' wife, his widow, crying because fans were booing. Sports should not be about cruelty. It should not be about killing the other team and all this stuff. It should be a good time and a good experience and a learning opportunity to set you up for the future. So as parents, keep that in mind, that this is something for your kid to achieve and get positive experiences out of. And if your kid is showing signs that whatever they're involved in is not a positive experience, acknowledge that, talk to them about it, figure out what's going on, because we don't need kids under any further pressure than they're under right now in a world when there's already a ton of pressure. And I think that's one side of this that gets left out. I have had so many conversations with student athletes about mental health. And at every level of play, the administrators care about the mental health of their student athletes because they love their student athletes and care about their student athletes, and they're struggling. And these kids feel like they're being left behind, or so-and-so got a deal and I didn't. What's the deal? How do I navigate this world? And the only way to get over some of that stuff is to talk about it and to get through it. So that's probably a topic that could be 8 different podcasts on its own. But yeah, that's the big thing. Your job in college is to come out with a degree and set yourself up for your career afterwards. Keep that in mind and make sure that if you're not enjoying your experience playing sports are not going to be fun for you. Sports should be about winning and having a good time. And, whether it's an individual sport or a team sport, once it stops being that, it's just pain,
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's, some great advice there, Thomas. And I think, no one should ever overlook one of the lessons that you gave earlier, that these kids getting opportunity to go and play sports and minimize their educational costs, even whether it's full ride or even partial. I mean, those are significant savings, and the chance to do something you really love to do and can further develop yourself is always in season. I mean, it's always good. So I think I love that. And then recognize, like, hey, school's not cheap. I mean, we just talked about one of the schools that you're talking about $68,000 a year. I mean, when you're talking about getting in upwards of $300,000 to get a 4-year degree, this scholarship and grant money is real money. I mean, that is the bulk of your NIL. If you want to loop that in, like, to what you're making, that's probably the most significant money most of the college athletes will make. I will say that there's a lot of creative things, and you talked about it, lessons that your son did that he learned out at Oakland, teaching other kids how to high jump and how to pole vault, and these very unique skills that there's not a lot of coaches running around. And a collegiate kid who gets taught at another level has a real opportunity. We saw that in one of our headlines a couple of weeks ago of the young lady who started that program for college athletes that educate. And I also say, I think there is a meal ticket out there. I watched a Grand Valley hockey player who got 12 meals a week from one of the food delivery services that were offering, like it wasn't HelloFresh, but one of those brands that are in that delivery. And man, for a college kid, when you're running and you don't have time to cook and this and that, what a deal. And wasn't a cash involvement, but man, there's a huge value to that amount of food as a college kid. So
Yeah.
there's so many
College hockey
things
is the cash cow waiting to happen. My interactions with college hockey players, I can't skate to save my life. I wish I was any good, but I have a lot of friends that played. Great kids, great personalities. B, a lot of them have been drafted already, because you can be drafted into the NHL, still play college, and that team retains your rights. And so, these are future pros. Like, you're watching guys play at U of M right now that will be in the NHL, or you're in Grand Rapids with the Griffins or some other AHL team. Sorry, I almost said IHL. That would date myself.
Yeah, that's old school right there, Thomas. That's old school.
Yeah, so there are opportunities like that are unique. And one thing that the last piece I want to say, because I know we should probably get off, or at least I should stop talking. But if you're a brand, educate yourself in this. What stunned me when I got started in this, I won't say which company I was doing some work with. Brands were so resistant, so just their ears were closed to this. These are great people to endorse a product. They're micro influencers. They have a great audience, especially at the smaller schools, because, one of the things we would laugh about is, like, look, you take JJ McCarthy, he might have like 800,000 followers, but like 799,000 of those are just Michigan fans who really don't care what he tweets about, or X's about, whatever they call that. The kid at like D2, his followers probably actually follow him or know him. And so even though they have fewer, they might be more impactful. And it could be a really simple deal. The kids aren't asking for a lot. You can do it in really interesting ways, and brands should just be open to it and say, how do we do this? And if you're a marketing person and you're not exploring this right now, I don't know what you're waiting for. I just don't get it. Yeah.
So. No, and I think, a great example of that is Cornerstone University, where we were at, just made a national news post showing their beautiful baseball stadium, which I think you've seen really before, cool. Thomas, right? Yeah. Which has the unique deal that their students live at the ball field. There's dorms above the stands, right? And it's I've never seen anything like that, right, Rob? Like, this is crazy. And I mean, why marketers aren't jumping on that from an NIL standpoint?
Yeah, have the kids staring at your ad, from their bedroom at all times. Yeah. It's amazing, and I think this environment will evolve. It'll continue to evolve. We're very early stage. I think collectives have their minute, and they're gonna run their course at some point in time, or modify over time. I think the other big thing is you're going to see donors saying, "Wait, I keep donating all this money to the football team, and what does it really get me? What does it mean for me?" I also think what it's done is create schools that already had unrealistic expectations. And I'm not picking on Texas A&M. Well, I am picking on Texas A&M. When was the last time you won a national championship in football? Stop pretending like you should be number 1 or 2 every single season. It's like, rein it in, guys. But that's the problem, is now schools are saying, well, maybe we can go do that. And it's amazing, because the 2 schools that played for the championship this year both have championship legacies. UW in my life has won national championships. Michigan certainly has produced great things. Now they're going to be in the same conference, which is amazing to me. But I mean, I think, we're seeing some sea changes in this world, and it's really amazing. By the way, both of those schools are also 2 of the top public institutions in the country, and top tier universities, regardless of public or private. They're both really highly ranked in almost all their programs. So it doesn't even have to be a school. Academics can still be a focus, and these schools can still compete academically as well.
Yeah. All right. I am Trent Clark with NIL4U. Rob Finkelstein, my co-host. Rob, thank you to Thomas Koch for for joining us. CEO of Varsity Gems, also Grand Valley State University entrepreneur in residence, and attorney Thomas Koch. I always like to, throw in that barrister if you want, whatever you want to, go with. I'm good.
The wig, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Rob, final words?
Yeah, it's Thomas. Great information. And like you said before, we'd probably be on this for hours. So we really appreciate everybody out there watching and listening to NIL4U. You can find us on SportsEpreneur, and look forward to our next show, Trent.
Excellent. For everybody else, we'll see you every week on the NIL4U show.